Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please join us in the study of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Today we will be studying Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Canto 2, Chapter 8, questions by King Parīkṣit. Please join us for Jai Radha Madhav prayers. Hare Krishna. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Nirvaradhari, Gopi Jana Vallabha devotees.
Hare Krishna, dear viewers. आप सभी का अभिनंदन है. We welcome you all to today's Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam class. Jīva Tattva Prabhu ji will give us very wonderful lessons today on Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Canto 2, Chapter 8. And before Prabhu ji goes ahead and shares about the subject of this class and the lessons, I want to really welcome all the new viewers, especially from all different parts of the world. मुझे यहाँ पर बहुत सारे व्यूअर्स दिख रहे हैं जो रेगुलरली अटेंड करते हैं. आप सबका बहुत बहुत अभिनंदन है. और जो आज पहली बार अटेंड कर रहे हैं श्रीमद् भागवतम क्लास, कृपया आप अपनी ग्रीटिंग के साथ में अपनी लोकेशन भी मेंशन करेंगे. तो प्रभु जी जब क्लास एंड होगी उसके बाद आपके मैसेजेस चेक करेंगे. सो जीव तत्व प्रभु जी, प्लीज गो अहेड विद द क्लास.
Hare Krishna, please join us for Mangalacharan prayers. We'll sing them together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudiryet. Shrotam Svakatha Kṛṣṇa Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridayantasto Hiya Bhadrani Vidunoti Saraswatam Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Ruttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, please join us in the recitation of the first verse of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Canto 2, Chapter 8. Questions by King Parīkṣit. Rajovacha Brahmana chodito Brahman Gunakhyane Agunasya cha Yasmai Yasmai Yatha Praha Narado Deva Darshanaha. Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. King Parīkṣit inquired from Shukdev Goswami, how did Narad Muni, whose hearers are as fortunate as those instructed by Lord Brahma, explain the transcendental qualities of the Lord, who is without material qualities and before whom did he speak? Hare Krishna, please join us for Guru Pranati. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paśyatya Deshatarine Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yad Kripa Tadham Vande Shri Gurum Dīnataranam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So, in the previous chapter, we heard as Lord Brahma, he revealed, the various incarnations, and it was basically he was discussing about the coming attractions. So Sutta Goswami at Naimisharanya is, reciting Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, and where the conversation between Lord Brahma and Devashi Narad is there. And this conversation was revealed by Shukdev Goswami to Parīkṣit Maharaj, where Parīkṣit Maharaj was fasting for 7 days. And here in this particular case, now Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking from Shukdev Goswami Okay, after having heard all these wonderful messages and Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam from Lord Brahma, Narad Muni, whose hearers, so again, not just Narad Muni is fortunate, even the people he spoke Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam to, they are as fortunate as if they received the instruction by Lord Brahma. Now this is very important. Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he stresses this aspect, that the knowledge is received in disciplic succession. So it is descending knowledge, not like ascending knowledge of this today's material world, where people are doing their own hypothesis and they are trying to do the experiments by their imperfect senses. And sometimes when people hear this, they like to challenge. But then the concept is very clear. There are three ways we can receive evidence in this material world. What are the three ways of receiving evidences in this material world? First one is by perception, right? By our direct experiments that we carry out. But then the four defects in this material world include our senses are imperfect. Also we have the second one is propensity to be deluded. Then third is propensity to cheat. And fourth is human reserve. So actually all four combine and prove that the first way of carrying out with various instruments what we are carrying out as experiments can be faulty. And so the knowledge we are getting may not be perfect knowledge, it may just be speculation. And which is the second way, which is Anuman Pramana. So first one is by various experiments, but our senses are imperfect, so we cannot accept that Pramana. Pramana is proof, right? The results. Second one is Anuman, speculation. So if someone is giving up a theory, it's only hypothesis. There is no basis behind it. Just like when Srila Prabhupada was in the West preaching Kṛṣṇa consciousness, at that time there was a scientist who received Nobel Prize for having just said that life comes from chemicals. And when he was asked, can you prove it? Can we give you these chemicals and can you produce life out of it? He gave up his, he just raised his hands, I can't do that. But this is what it is. It's a special combination in a special condition, in a special environment that cannot be produced in our current times, life can be formed. So, sometimes people give this hypothesis, they cannot be accepted. Now what's the third kind? Third is Shabda Prama, that we accept the instructions given in the scriptures. And these instructions may be given in the scriptures, but we cannot just interpret with our mundane senses. We should not try to speculate on those. Rather, these have to be understood under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. Just like Lord Brahma is the spiritual master for Devashi Narad. And Devashi Narad provided these instructions to Srila Vyasadeva. So again, he is the instructing spiritual master of Srila Vyasadeva. Srila Vyasadeva provided it to Shukdev Goswami, who was already a realized soul. So again, this is another place where Acharyas reveal that Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is meant for the Paramhamsas, because they relish hearing and discussing the various topics in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And yet at the same time, it is made for this Kali age. So again, this is where we understand that people, they do not understand what is the purpose of life. And for that, to be able to reveal the way back home, back to Godhead, Srila Vyasadeva, being very compassionate towards the fallen conditioned souls, for you and me, he wrote Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, where this message is contained, and the Acharyas explain it to us, so we should understand the explanation given by the Acharyas and develop our realizations by our own experiences, not speculation. That is very important. Following the instructions of Sadhu, Guru and Shastra. So again, these are the three references, and we follow the instructions of Guru. So Srila Prabhupada identifies that yes, this is descending knowledge. It is coming directly from Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa. So the knowledge when coming down from Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa is pure, right? So when Lord Brahma received it from Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa, he passed it to Devashi Narad. Devashi Narad passed it to Srila Vyasadeva and finally to Shukdev Goswami. And that's why Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is said to be the ripened fruit of Vedic knowledge, right? It is Srila Vyasadeva's commentary on Vedanta Sutras again. And we understand from that perspective that it has become even more relishable as given in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam when it is being touched by Shuka. Shuka also means parrot. So when Shukdev Goswami sings Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and he recites the whole Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam to Parīkṣit Maharaj in the assembly of great sages. And it is very interesting that it tells us the qualification of audience. Audience is made up of amazing, means these great sages, which include, Devashi Narad sitting in that assembly. It also includes, Srila Vyasadeva in that assembly. So again, all these great personalities are sitting. So you could say that, here, Param Guru of Shukdev Goswami, Devashi Narad is sitting. His Guru Dev, Vyasadeva is sitting. Yet at the same time, Shukdev Goswami is speaking on the Vyasasana, which means that in disciplic succession, a teacher actually becomes, and of course his brothers, his god brothers and others, they become very happy when a devotee, is properly trying to preach, and they understand the concept, right? They understand that when someone is preaching, they are only preaching it as a service to their spiritual master, to, following the steps, which following the steps means following the instructions of spiritual master. So from that particular perspective, this particular verse is very relevant as Srila Prabhupada reveals, because the knowledge is received in disciplic succession, so the knowledge received is as it is. Just like Srila Prabhupada, he translated Bhagavad Gita as it is, as Lord Kṛṣṇa intended, which was passed from one Acharya to another Acharya in disciplic succession, and finally Srila Prabhupada wrote it for our benefit so that we can understand the instructions and take to the chanting. And now what's the difference between Bhagavad Gita and Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam? In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Kṛṣṇa himself is speaking, right? Song of God, that's the meaning of Bhagavad Gita. And Lord Kṛṣṇa is saying what we should do. But in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, he is describing how we should do that. And here, Parīkṣit Maharaj, as a perfect disciple, right, he's asking these questions which also tell us how to ask spiritual questions to make this life perfect. We shouldn't be asking for questions like, how can I become rich, or how can I, get my student, entrance into IIT or IIMs and other colleges. Rather, what we should be asking is, how can I become a devotee? How can my family become a devotee? How can we, overcome the mysteries of this life? How can we understand how great Lord Kṛṣṇa is, how great God is? These are the kind of inquiries, and these are the inquiries Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking. But he's asking with that very starting aspect is because he already has seen in the previous two chapters the coming attractions. And so those coming attractions where the glories of Lord Kṛṣṇa and his devotees would be spoken, he is encouraging Shukdev Goswami. So that is also very important. Pariprashnena sevaya. So we have to follow the process. So again, it is not that someone is studying with you on Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam or Bhagavad Gita, you start challenging the person. Rather, we should understand that the person is performing a service, and we as audience are also engaged in this service, and even the questionnaires, because again, people who are inquiring, the inquirers are also performing great service. And sometimes when we are not initiated, it becomes a gyat sukriti. So unknowingly we may be inquiring for a very important subject matter which is for our benefit. And here Parīkṣit Maharaj, he is asking this question, and he clearly identified, as Srila Prabhupada reveals in the purport, that the message when is being passed, then the message is as it is, as if it is received from Lord Brahma or Lord Kṛṣṇa himself. So that is how it should be taken. So later on, this message was repeated at Naimisharanya by Sutta Goswami. So the sages in Naimisharanya didn't say, oh, you heard it from Shukdev Goswami, we don't want to hear it from you. We will hear it only from Shukdev Goswami. They did not say that. They understood that the message is important. And the messenger is trying to perform this service so as to bring us closer to Kṛṣṇa. So we should feel very grateful to people who are trying to engage in service and encourage them, just like Parīkṣit Maharaj is encouraging, and at the same time engage in Shravanam. Shravanam of the 9 processes comes first, which is the most important one. And we should take to Shravanam, because from Shravanam comes, Kirti. But as soon as you hear someone's name, you immediately think of that person. Right? When you hear your brothers, sisters, uncles, or parents' name, immediately their image comes in front of you. And you are filled with some, emotions. And as you remember a person. So that's what should happen when we hear Shravanam. We should think of Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa and his devotees, and how merciful his devotees are, who are constantly working to benefit the society. Now here Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking some very important questions, and that is the important aspect. Like, all these questions are not material questions. How do I get promotion? These are not the questions. He is not asking how to, save myself from, facing death. Rather, he is asking about spiritual inquiry, because he understands. Shukdev Goswami has already revealed to him that the purpose of this life is to make it perfect. By engaging in Krishna consciousness, by performing devotional service, and so by Shravanam itself, he attains perfection. Parīkṣit Maharaj attains perfection. So what we are doing is, we are trying to understand his inquiries and how by Shravanam itself he was able to realize God. Parīkṣit Maharaj continues to ask various questions of Shukdev Goswami, and he is glorifying Shukdev Goswami. That at the end, means again near the end of his questions, he is glorifying Shukdev Goswami. So there are 3 parts to these questions. First is that he is encouraging. So when we are asking spiritual inquiries, we should not be asking in a challenging mood, rather we should be asking in a humble mood. And which is also given, as per the instruction in Bhagavad Gita by Lord Kṛṣṇa. He reveals that to Arjuna. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya updeshyanti tajjnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. Tadvidhi pranipatena. Please try to understand the process. Paripatena is, take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. Pariprashnena sevaya. Inquire from him or them submissively and perform some service. Performing service means sevas, and there are 2 ways to perform seva we talked about: Vapu seva and Vani seva. Vapu seva is serving the very body, of the spiritual master, and we always consider that he is a spiritual being because he is in direct contact with Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa. And then Vani is following his instructions, and Vani seva is considered much higher than Vapu seva. That doesn't mean you neglect the former, but Vani Seva is following the instructions that you can carry out, like Srila Prabhupada. He carried out the instructions of his spiritual master as a service. So that is Seva, that is our Seva, to carry out the spiritual master, to follow the spiritual master's instructions, because it is for our own purification and for the purification of all living entities around us. So through us, we can only be an instrument, right? We can engage in devotional service following the instructions and encourage others. We cannot make others take to devotional service by our power. It is by Lord Krishna's potency that everything is working. We are just an instrument. So that is the humble state. While in material world, everyone shows that I am the one doing it, right? Prakate kriyamanani gune karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimuddhatma kartaham iti manyate. Ahankara vimuddhatma kartaham iti manyate. Even the Lord Krishna is revealing in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna that prakate kriyamanani gune karmani sarvashaha. All these activities are being performed under the 3 modes, the 3 gunas: Rajaguna, Sattva-guna and Tamo-guna. So mode of goodness is Sattva-guna, mode of passion is Rajaguna, and mode of ignorance is Tamo-guna. Yet at the same time, Ahankara Vimuddhatma, being deluded under the influence of the false ego, being under the influence of the three modes of material nature, a living entity, an embodied living entity, thinks that I am the one who is doing all these activities. Kartaham iti manyate. So such is the belief. While we realize that we living entities are just energy potency of Lord Shri Krishna. We are the Tatashta Shakti. And Jivera Sarup hoya Krishnera Nityadas. So our very nature, our constitutional position is to be an eternal servant of Lord Shri Krishna. So when we follow the instruction of spiritual master, and his instructions are always for us to be situated in our constitutional position, in a servant position, and servant serves. And the serving is considered, better when we serve it in a grateful mood, in a humble mood, in a devotional mood, in a loving mood, hoping that through us, Lord's message will reach to all the audience who are listening to us. So this is how, Shukdev Goswami himself is revealing. So again, we should not take to the mentality of materialistic man who always try to speak first. There are speakers who are in the audience here who are not speaking. Means again, throughout Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we never hear that Shukdev Goswami stops and say, my dear Devashi Narad, you are my Param Guru, why don't you speak something? Or he doesn't say, my dear Father, my dear Gurudev, Srila Vyasdev, why don't you speak something? He is simply speaking, and he is constantly remembering Lord Shri Krishna. He is constantly paying obeisances to his spiritual masters, and he is constantly speaking, being encouraged by them. And the spiritual masters are also feeling very encouraged by seeing how wonderfully Shukdev Goswami is responding to Maharaj Parikṣit's inquiries. So what are the kind of questions that one should ask? Parikṣit Maharaj, again after realizing and showing his gratitude, he is now, after encouraging Shukdev Goswami, he is saying, please tell me about Lord's different incarnations of his various pastimes. And then he brings back all the audience to what the subject matter is, because the subject matter is primary creation and secondary creation. Primary creation we covered in the first canto, right? Atra Sarga Visargascha. So again, the 10 subject matters we'll cover in the last chapter, the chapter 10 of second canto. And in the 9th chapter of second canto, which we'll be covering tomorrow, we'll be covering Chatushloki Bhagavatam. So don't forget to attend that one. But this one is also very important because he brings back to the point of secondary creation. And he talks about different kind of annihilations that takes place in this material world. So of course there is annihilation at the primary creation level, there is annihilation at the secondary creation level, and then there are two other levels of annihilations within the material world, especially on the earthly kingdoms, where the effect of Kali and Dwapara Yuga, Satyuga, Treta Yuga, all these effects are there. So they have been discussed as well. So he is inquiring about all these different times, how does the creation and annihilation takes place, and what is the cause of living entity. Now here Srila Prabhupada, in his lecture, one of his lecture, he is saying that, we understand that there is, for any effect, and everything to be there, there has to be a cause. And we have to understand what that cause is. It is not that you mix the chemicals and then a life form appears, or it is, that the human beings are other living entities, the children, they are born of lust, father, mother, they mated together and then there were, babies born. There is a greater science behind it, and that needs to be understood, because our life, is not just, means we as living entities are eternal in nature, while the body is nashwa, body is temporary. And we, after giving up this body, we take on another body, right? And Lord Krishna reveals that, in the very first few instructions. Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantar praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. Dehino asmin, Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna is revealing. Yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara. So just like a person takes on, body of a baby, then grows up to be a boy, a youth, and then finally a grown-up man, and then jara, this is old age. Tata dehantar praptir. So at the end of life, praptir what? Dhiras tatra. Then he gets another body. And dhiras tatra namoyati. And a sober person is not bewildered, is not disturbed by these changes. Scientists have proven, once again, they are able to prove that, okay, in 7 years, every cell of our body is changed. But then we also realize that we remember incidents that took, decades back, 20 years back, 30 years back. So how is that possible if every cell is changed? So there must be something that is remembering it, and that is memory, right? Our memory is preserved. Intelligence is buddhi, and it is mind that contains the memory bank. So it is our memory bank as well. It carries all the impressions. That's why we take to the chanting of mantra, manatrayati iti mantra. One that delivers the mind is called mantra, and we chant the Maha Mantra. Hare Kṛṣṇa, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare. Because when mind is carrying various kind of impressions, they are like layers over layers over layers. So our Krishna consciousness, our devotion to Lord Krishna, our relationship with Lord Shri Krishna, it gets covered and we become deluded under the influence of this material energy. So by chanting this Maha Mantra, the transcendental sound vibration enters through our ears into our heart, and that's where Cheto Darpanamarjanam happens, right? So our consciousness is cleansed, and in the mirror we are able to see. And how do we see ourselves? Jīvera Surupaya Krishnera Nityadas, Krishnera Tatashta Shakti Bheda Bhed Prakash. So again, this is also where we understand that we are the eternal servant of Lord Shri Krishna, we are the marginal potency. Radharani represents the internal potency, right? And Mahamaya represents the external potency of Lord Shri Krishna. And we are the marginal potency. So, Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking about, the creation, the secondary creation, primary creations, the various kind of annihilations that happen in this material universe. And he further inquires about what is the cause of various living entities to be born. And all these questions are spiritual questions because they help us understand who we are, Sambandha Gyan. That's where our spiritual progress starts. It starts with Sambandha Gyan, which is what is our relationship with Lord Shri Krishna. And we are eternal servant and He is our eternal master. So that is the understanding of that relationship. Now how to link with Him, that yoga means linking with God, is through the 9 process of devotional service. Shravanam Ketanam Vishnu, Smaranam Padasevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyam, Sakhyam Atmanivedam. Shravanam, just by hearing, right? We can, and that's also one of the devotional process, and it's the most potent one. Then Kirtanam, by glorifying Lord Shri Krishna, reading Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Bhagavad Gita, singing Kirtans, all are Kirtanam. And Smaranam, by remembering Lord Shri Krishna. So Shravanam, again the personality who attains perfection just by hearing is Parīkṣit Maharaj. Shukdev Goswami, just by reciting Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, he attains perfection. Prahlad Maharaj, he attains perfection by Smaranam. So even by following one of the 9 processes, we can attain perfection in this very life. And then Padasevanam, Goddess Lakshmi, she attains perfection by serving the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. And Lord Vishnu is non different from Lord Shri Krishna. The only difference is that Lord Krishna is the avatari and Lord Vishnu is the avatar. So Lord Vishnu is an expansion of plenary portion of Lord Shri Krishna. And then Archanam, Prithu Maharaj attained perfection just by worshipping the Lordship. By worshipping, that's why we say, Archana Vidhi, or worshipping the Arch Vigraha form, the deity form of Lord Shri Krishna. And Vandanam, Akrur attained perfection just by singing prayers to Lord Shri Krishna. Dasyam, Hanumanji, Bajrangbali, he attained perfection just by serving the Lordship, by carrying out his orders. Sakyam, Arjuna attains perfection just by being friendly to Lord Shri Krishna, by being his friend. And then Atmanivedanam, Daitya Rajbali Maharaj, he attains perfection by surrendering everything to Lord Shri Krishna. And who are the other examples? People generally jump to the other examples, but we have to understand the mood. So Bali Maharaj example is given. Of course, gopis are there, Radharani is there. They of course surrender everything. But Bali Maharaj shows this by examples. That's why his example is given again and again. Atmadevedaram. And which is also one of the 6 limbs of Sharanagati. By surrendering everything in serving Lord Shri Krishna. To please Lord Shri Krishna. So as Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking, he is now, the third aspect comes, that he wants to hear Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as it is, right? And he is saying to Shukdev Goswami that you are as good as Brahma. Now again, in the beginning, he said that whoever is hearing from, Devashi Narada, they are as good as they are getting it directly from Lord Brahma, because the message is passed on as it is, without modifications. The speaker only adds their realizations, but the principles are stated as, they have been given, and the message is passed as is. And then, Parīkṣit Maharaj, when he asked these questions about the various incarnations of Lord Shri Krishna, various devotees, as how they were able to attain perfection, about creation and annihilation, these are all questions which are related with Lord Shri Krishna, right? That to understand what is the purpose of this material world. Why did Lord Krishna create this material world? Because we had become Bahirmukhi. We had turned our back to Krishna. We wanted to enjoy. So that is our mistake. Now we realize that yes, there is no happiness in this material world and we can be eternally happy with Lord Shri Krishna. So we want to take to that path. Now I will also be sharing some snippets of various lessons in series of lectures later on. So that this session stays within the time frame. At that time, Sutta Goswami, he is revealing at Naimisharyan that at that moment, hearing this question, Shukdev Goswami was very pleased, and he prepared himself to answer all the questions of Parīkṣit Maharaj. Now, Srila Prabhupada, he reveals that this is where a spiritual master is glorified. Tad vidhi paripatena pariprashrena sevya ubdeshyanti tajjnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. So the spiritual master is tattvadarshi. He has seen the truth. He has realized the truth. So Shukdev Goswami is revealing all the pastimes and all the instructions as to Parīkṣit Maharaj based on his realizations. And he is already a self-realized soul, and further he is endowed with Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam by his own father, Srila Vyasdev. And at that time, he has been called equal to Lord Brahma because the message is coming as it is by Parīkṣit Maharaj. So Parīkṣit Maharaj is addressing him as if like that you are as good as Lord Brahma. And Lord Brahma is the perfect first living entity of this small material universe that we have. The unlimited material universes like our universe. And Shukdev Goswami at this point, just ends, the chapter ends where Shukdev Goswami is revealing to the sages at Naimisharanya that Shukdev Goswami is perfectly getting ready to answer these questions. So it is not that if somebody asks a question, we have to answer all the questions. We have to answer the questions that relate with the subject matter, that relate with the elevation in Krishna consciousness. That is also an important matter. And when as an audience or as an inquirer we ask questions, this lesson teaches us how to ask spiritual questions that can enable us to make this life perfect, that can help us in our spiritual advancement, that can help us in coming closer to Lord Shri Krishna, that can help us realize who we are and what's the purpose of this life. So this is where this chapter ends. Hare Kṛṣṇa. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask the questions so that we can address those. Gantra Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai, Śrīla Bhagavad ki jai, Anant Koti Vaishnava Vind ki jai, Nitai Go Premanande. Hari Hari Bol. Hare Kṛṣṇa.
हरे कृष्णा डियर व्यूअर्स, हरि बोल. आप सभी का स्वागत है, अभिनंदन है. फॉर दोज ऑफ यू हु आर just joining, Jīva Tattva Prabhu ji today gave us the class on Canto 2, Chapter 8, where Shukdev Goswami has been asked questions by Parīkṣit Maharaj, and we got valuable lessons that what should be our mood what should be the nature of our questions so that we can make spiritual advancement. So as of now, if you have any questions, अगर प्रभु जी से आपको कुछ questions पूछने हैं, आप comments में कृपया लिख दें. I will read out your questions to him. And Prabhuji, meanwhile, we can give it few seconds, few minutes. Can you help us understand at a high level in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Bhagwan and his Leelas are being glorified. So there is an emphasis on Shravanam and Kirtanam. So when we ask questions, is that also a devotional service?
Yes, Parīkṣit Maharaj is asking questions from Shukdev Goswami, and so by asking these questions he's clarifying his doubts, right? And this is very important. There is a very nice story that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj Srila Prabhupada used to share. So he shared in his writings. So this story is that there was a Brahman. He was a very poor Brahman, and in a village he was like, everyone was saying that actually there was a rumor that he's actually very rich, yet he acts like a poor Brahman so that he can get more money from others. And hearing this, जब ऐसा लोग सुनते थे कि जो ब्राह्मण है कि अच्छा ये बहुत रिच ब्राह्मण है लेकिन वो गरीब के जैसा बिहेव करता है ताकि लोगों से धन समेट सके, ऐसा सुन के वो ब्राह्मण बड़ा दुखी होता है कि अब तो पहले तो ही इज ऑलरेडी पुअर, पहले से गरीब है और उसके बाद में लोग उसको सर्विस भी नहीं देते हैं, तो ऐसे में कैसे अपना जीविका निभाएगा और कैसे अपने परिवार की कोई जीविका को सपोर्ट करेगा, हाउ द लाइवलीहुड ऑफ ऑफ द ब्राह्मण एंड हिज फैमिली विल बी टेकन केयर ऑफ. तो ऐसे में देयर वाज अ सेज, self-effulgent sage. He observes this, he understands that this Brahman is in trouble, so let me help him. वो ब्राह्मण के पास आते हैं, बोलते हैं कि क्या तुम इतने दुखी क्यों हो? तो ब्राह्मण बोलता है कि मेरे को सब लोग इस तरह से बोलते हैं कि मैं बहुत गरीब हूँ, जबकि वो बोलते हैं मैं बहुत अमीर हूँ, तो कोई मेरे को सर्विस भी नहीं देता, मैं अपने परिवार का कैसे ख्याल रखूँ? बोलते हैं एक्चुअली यू आर वेरी रिच. So the Brahman is shocked. He said, now you are also pulling my leg. हाँ, आप भी मेरा मजाक उड़ा रहे हैं. बोलते हैं no, actually your forefathers, they kept huge amount of pot of jewels and gold hidden in your courtyard. So he hears that, he immediately goes to the courtyard and with the sadhu, and he starts digging on the north end. So the sadhu says, no, don't dig here. He says, why? Why shouldn't I dig here? Because there are scorpions in this area. They may bite you and then you may die. So don't dig here. So he goes to the southern side. He starts digging there. The sadhu says, no, don't dig here. He says, why? He says, because there is a snake that lives there. It will bite you and you will be dead. So he is surprised. So he goes to the western side. He starts digging there. Sadhu says, don't dig there. So he says, why? Sadhu says, because there are ghosts that live there. There are dead bodies there which were buried without doing their proper rituals. So they have become ghosts and they are in that area. So if you disturb their bodies, they will attack you. So now the Brahman is so perplexed. He said, where should I dig? Please tell me, where should I dig? If you already know this, why don't you tell me? He said, now this is a proper question you have asked. Where should you dig? You should dig on the east side. And when digs on the east side, exactly to the spot, at the spot where the sadhu asked, तो जहाँ पे साधु बताते हैं उसके प्रश्न पूछने पे कि पूर्व दिशा में इस जगह पे खोदो, तो वहाँ से उसको golden pot मिलता है filled with gold and jewels. So what is this lesson telling us? Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, what is he telling us through this lesson? Through this story, the lesson is telling us is that when we take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, we should inquire from them. And similarly, in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Parīkṣit Maharaj is constantly inquiring from Shukdev Goswami, who has accepted as his spiritual master. And at Naimisharanya, Shaunaka Rishi is the spokesperson of the sages. And he is constantly inquiring from Sutta Goswami. In all of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we so many times hear so many inquiries being made. Just like Yudhishthira Maharaj, he inquires from Devashi Narad. When he sees Shashupal, after Lord Kṛṣṇa killing Shashupal, the soul from Shashupal's body comes and merges into Lord Kṛṣṇa. So Yudhishthira Maharaj question becomes, oh Lord Krishna, isn't he too merciful? Isn't he partial towards even the demons? That's his question. While Parīkṣit Maharaj, when he asked that question, which caused Shukdev Goswami to reveal this story of Shishupal Vad, killing of Shishupal, Parīkṣit Maharaj's question was, isn't Lord so partial towards his devotees? So again, completely opposite. Lord is like, Krishna Surya Sama. So Lord Krishna is like sun, and sun is constantly, benefiting everyone. It's, the sunshine falls at pure places as well as abominable places. Even the dirty places, urine and others, they evaporate and the place becomes disinfected. So the sun is also purifying, yet at the same time it doesn't mean that the sun has become polluted. The sun stays pure. So Lord Krishna is like that. He is always pure, and whether he interacts with the devotees or the demons, both of them are liberated. So again, Lord Krishna does not kill. It is Vishnu in Krishna who kills. Hopefully this answers the question that there are constant inquiries throughout Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And these inquiries enable the inquirer to get special benefit by clearing the doubts that inquirer has, and helps them gain great speed in their spiritual progress. Hare Krishna.
हरे कृष्णा. सो ये जो क्वेश्चन हमने अभी किया था, तो इससे हम सबको यही अंडरस्टैंडिंग मिलती है, इफ़ वी मेक सच स्पिरिचुअल इंक्वायरीज, इट प्यूरिफाइज एवरीवन एंड वी मेक स्पिरिचुअल एडवांसमेंट, we please Krishna, we serve Krishna, and so this is bhakti, this is devotional service. So Prabhuji, there is one more question, and I think you should explain this because this will really benefit everyone. So by reading and hearing Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and asking questions, can we develop a mood of humility, a mood of tolerance, because we hear, how we should come to this attitude of surrender. So devotees often wonder, when they chant, when they read Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Bhagavad Gita, so how is this mood of humility and tolerance developing? Because when situations happen, that is when we often wonder, did I deal with humility or tolerance?
Right. So again, when we are engaging in devotional service are the activities, all the processes are the activities in transcendence. They are not of this material nature, right? They are above the three modes of material modes. So we talked about mode of goodness, passion and ignorance. All these modes are like gunas. Guna also means ropes, which bind us. But when we engage in devotional service, it helps us rise above. And when we are in the transcendental mode, we become Brahma Bhuta. And a Brahma Bhuta person is Prasannatma. Brahma Bhuta, Prasannatma, na shochati na kamshati. Does not lament or hanker for the future. Sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakti indavate param. And is equally having equal vision towards all living entities and engaging in devotional service. So what does that mean? That to be able to come to that level, first one has to become peaceful, right? And to become peaceful, one has to realize that Lord Krishna is the supreme proprietor of all material and spiritual universes. He is the beneficiary of all yajnas, and he is the best friend, the benefactor, the well-wisher of every living entity. So we become friendly towards all living entities. And by engagement in devotional service, we give up the six vices: Kam, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsara. Right? Lust, anger, greed, pride, attachment, mud, right, is also sometimes referred to as attachment, pride, and delusion. And Matsara is envy. And so when we overcome all these, we become pacified, we become peaceful, and we become happy, we become Prasannatma. And such a person, of course, behaves in that mood of humility and tolerance. There is also another aspect. To engage in devotional service, it is very important for us. For us, it is also very important that in humility, when we are engaged, right, how do we, then our devotional service becomes potent as well. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gives this formula in Shikshastakam verse 3. Tranadapi sunichena tarorapi sahishnuna manina manadeda kirtaniya sadahari. So again, Tranadapi sunichena, being more humble than the grass on the street. Tarorapi sahishnuna, more tolerant than the tree. Amanina manadena. Amanina means not expecting any respect from others. Manadena means ready to give all kind of respects to others. Kirtaniya sadhari, one can constantly chant the holy name. And chanting of the holy name is the beginning of devotional service. It simply starts by raising our hands and calling out, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare. Once somebody asked Srila Prabhupada, so what is the effect of chanting? What do you expect to get from chanting? Srila Prabhupada's response was, more chanting. Because it is abhidaya and prayojana, so it is the goal as well. By engaging in devotional service, that is the goal. Hare Kṛṣṇa.
Hare Krishna.
Gantra Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Bhagavad ki jai, Anant Koti Vaishnavind ki jai, Nitai Go Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Hare Kṛṣṇa. Please join us for Narasimha Devati.
Namaste Narasimhaya, Namaste Narasimhaya, Prahlāda Lādayine, Prahlāda Lādayine, Hiranyakāśhipurbhakshaha, Hiranyakāśhipurbhakshaha, Shiladankānakhālaye, Shiladankānakhālaye, Ito Narsingho, Parito Narsingho, Ito Narsingho, Parito Narsingho, Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsingho, Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsingho, Mahir Narsingho, Hridaye Narsingho, Mahir Narsingho, Hridaye Narsingho, Narasingha Madhim Sharanam Prapadye, Narasingha Madhim Sharanam Prapadye, Tava Kara Kamalavare, Nakam Adbhuta Śrīngha, Lalita Hiranyakāśhipu, Tanu Bringa, Keshavadita, Hari Rupa, Jai Jagadish Hare, Jai Jagadish Hare, Jai Jagadish Hare, Tava Kara Kamalavare, Nakam Adbhuta Śrīngha, Lalita Hiranyakāśhipu, Tanu Bringa, Keshavadita, Narhari Rupa, Jai Jagadish Hare, Jaya Jagadish Hare, Jaya Jagadish Hare, Jaya Narsingha Dev, Jaya Narsingha Dev, Jaya Narsingha Dev, Jaya Narsingha Dev, Jaya Prahlāda
श्री नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय, प्रहलाद महाराज की जय, शिला प्रभुपाद की जय, अनंत कौरव वैष्णववृंद की जय, निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे। हरि हरि बोल। हरे कृष्णा।